My name is Evelyn Hart, and at 52 years old, I found myself sitting in the corner of a plasma donation center in Denver, Colorado, gripping a clipboard like it was the last lifeline I had. The receptionist had just handed me a stack of forms, and while her smile looked polite enough, it did nothing to study the heaviness in my chest. I was here for one reason. I needed $40 to buy my son's asthma medication. As I filled in my name and scratched down my sister's address, the reality of how far I had fallen pressed hard against my ribs. Only a year ago, I ran a respected event planning company with clients across the state. I owned a home, a thriving business, and a life that felt stable. But life has a strange way of collapsing in on itself when you least expect it. Now I sat among strangers, pretending like this was normal, pretending like I belonged here. The pen shook slightly in my hand as I checked each box on the form. No recent tattoos, no travel, no drug use, no fainting spells, just a middle-aged woman trying to trade her own blood for a few dollars and a little dignity. What I did not know was that within that small vial of blood lay something that would change everything. A year earlier, my life looked nothing like this. Back then, I was the proud owner of Heartline Events, a company I had built from scratch over nearly 2 decades. We planned charity galas, corporate retreats, weddings, and community festivals. I had a small team I trusted, clients who greeted me with warm hugs, and a schedule so full I barely had time to breathe. It was the kind of busy that felt rewarding, the kind that made you believe you were building something solid and lasting. All of that changed in one night. It was a summer fundraiser for a local bank, an event we had prepared for with our usual precision, but somewhere between transport and storage, a refrigeration unit malfunctioned and no one caught it in time. By the end of the evening, dozens of guests fell violently ill. Within days, the story spread across every news outlet in Denver. Reporters camped outside my office, lawsuits multiplied faster than we could respond, clients canceled contracts, the suppliers involved shifted blame, and me, the face of the company, became the person everyone pointed to. My husband, Mark, could not handle the fallout. He said the business had consumed me for years, and now it was destroying us. One night, after an argument that left us both exhausted, he packed his things and walked out, choosing a fresh start with someone new rather than fighting through the chaos with me. His departure felt like a second blow, sharper than the first. Within months, the business collapsed under financial pressure. Our home was sold, every savings account drained. What remained was my son and me, trying to survive the wreckage of a life I thought was secure. And that was how I ended up in that donation center, holding a pen with shaking hands, trying to trade my own plasma for $40. The nurse who called my name looked barely 30, with kind eyes and a gentle voice that made me feel slightly less out of place. She led me into a small room with a blood pressure cuff, a scale, and a metal tray of neatly arranged supplies. I sat down, clutching my purse in my lap like a shield. "First-time donor?" she asked. I nodded. She wrapped the cuff around my arm, made small talk, then tied a tourniquet and examined the inside of my elbow. Her eyebrows lifted. "You have great veins. Easiest one I have seen all day." I tried to smile, but all I could think about was the medication my son needed. When she drew the initial sample, I barely felt it. She labeled the tube, thanked me for my patience, and stepped out to run the basic tests. Minutes passed, then 10, then 15. When the door opened again, she was not smiling anymore. Behind her stood a man in a white coat, older, with a serious expression that made the room feel suddenly smaller. "Mrs. Hart," he said, offering a hand. "I'm Dr. Samuel Pierce, the medical director here. We need to go over something unusual in your sample." Unusual? The word tightened something deep in my chest. Dr. Pierce sat down across from me. "Your blood type is what we call raw null. It is extremely rare, so rare that the International Registry flags any new case immediately. There are only a few dozen known donors in the world." I blinked at him. I had come here for $40. I had not expected to hear a sentence that sounded like it belonged in a medical documentary. Before I could ask what it meant, someone else entered, a tall man in a suit carrying a leather folder. Jonathan Blackwood placed the leather folder on the table between us, his posture calm but his eyes carrying a sense of urgency that made my pulse quicken. He explained that the international alert triggered by my blood type had reached a specialized cardiac clinic in Switzerland almost immediately. A patient there, a prominent figure in global finance, was preparing for an extremely complex heart procedure. The challenge wasn't the surgery itself, but the transfusions required during it. Only raw null blood would be safe for him. And you are the only known match in the Western Hemisphere, Jonathan said quietly. I felt the room tilt. I had come here hoping to exchange a piece of myself for medication money, not to be told my blood might save a stranger on the other side of the world. Jonathan continued, outlining what sounded like a scene from a movie. They would arrange private transport to Geneva that very day. I would stay in a medical suite, receive constant monitoring, and undergo a series of small, spaced-out donations. The compensation offered was $3 million. $3 million? I could barely comprehend the number. I asked for time to make a call. Jonathan nodded and stepped outside with Dr. Pierce. My fingers shook as I dialed my son Caleb. "Mom, are you okay? Did something happen?" he asked the moment he picked up. I told him everything, stumbling over details that still felt unreal to me. He was silent for a long moment before saying, "Mom, this sounds unbelievable, but maybe unbelievable is what we need." His voice steadied me in a way nothing else could. After the call, I asked to see the contract. Old habits from my business days clicked into place as I read every line. I requested changes, health protections, donation limits, emergency exit clauses. Jonathan agreed to all of them, and for the first time in months, I signed something with hope instead of fear. The flight to Switzerland felt unreal from the moment I stepped on the small jet waiting on the private side of the airport. I had never been on a plane like that before. Soft leather seats, warm lights, a flight attendant who spoke gently, as if trying not to startle me. I kept my hands folded tightly in my lap, afraid that if I relaxed even a little, the strangeness of it all would wash over me too fast. Jonathan traveled with me, reviewing the plan once more as the plane crossed the Atlantic. I listened, nodding when needed, but my thoughts drifted often. I kept thinking of Caleb, of how his face lit up when I told him I might be able to pay off our debts, pay for his medication without worry, maybe even give him a future again. When we finally landed in Geneva, the sun had just dipped behind the mountains, leaving the sky streaked with soft pink and gold. A car waited for us, and as we drove along the edge of Lake Geneva, the world outside the window looked almost too beautiful to be real. The clinic itself felt more like a luxury resort than a medical facility. My suite had tall windows overlooking the water, a sitting area, and a bed so soft it almost swallowed me when I sat on it. A nurse named Elise introduced herself and walked me through every detail of the upcoming procedures. Her calmness steadied me. Later that evening, Dr. Emil Weber, the lead surgeon, visited my room. He explained the surgery planned for the patient and why my blood was essential to its success. His tone was respectful, almost reverent in a way I had never heard from a doctor before. "You are giving someone a chance they can't get anywhere else," he said. For the first time since this began, I understood the weight of what I had agreed to, and despite the fear, something inside me felt quietly steady. The morning after I arrived, Elise knocked gently on my door and told me someone wished to speak with me before his surgery. I assumed it would be another doctor or administrator. Instead, she led me down a quiet hallway to a private room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the lake. Inside, seated near the glass with a blanket over his legs, was the man whose life now depended on my blood, Graham Whitlock. I recognized the name from business headlines over the years. He was the kind of man newspapers described with phrases like financial architect and the mind behind empires. But the person in the chair looked nothing like the commanding figure I had imagined. His face was pale, his breathing slow but deliberate, and when he looked up at me, his eyes held something I hadn't expected at all: humility. "Mrs. Hart," he said, extending a hand that trembled slightly. "Thank you for agreeing to meet me." I sat across from him, unsure what to say. He gave a faint smile. "I have spent most of my life solving problems with money, yet the one thing that saved me came from someone who had none of it left. You gave me more than blood. You gave me time, and I want you to have something in return." I tried to protest, but he lifted a hand gently. "Please let me finish. He told me he had been reviewing my business background with his team, not in a prying way, but because he believed I had experience that mattered much more than my failures. He explained that his company often worked with organizations facing crisis, both financial and operational, and that my ability to rebuild after disaster made me uniquely qualified to guide others through the same storms. "I want to help you start again," he said, "not out of obligation, but because I believe you still have so much to offer." He outlined an idea for a consulting firm focused on recovery planning, something small at first, but with real potential. His team could help with structure, resources, and early clients. The business would be entirely mine. Before I could respond, he added one more thing. "Caleb deserves his future too. If he wants to return to school, I can make sure he has the support he needs. No strings attached." The words settled over me like warmth after a long winter. For months, I had felt like life had been closing doors faster than I could reach for them. Now, for the first time, someone was opening one. And not just any door, but one that led to a future I had stopped imagining for myself. Leaving Switzerland felt strangely bittersweet. I had arrived there as someone desperate, someone clinging to the hope that a few donations might keep my son's medication cabinet from going empty. I returned home carrying something far different, a plan, a future, and a sense of worth I had not felt in years. Denver looked the same, but I no longer felt like the same woman who had left it. Caleb hugged me so tightly at the airport that I could barely breathe. He listened to every detail I shared about Graham's recovery, about the consulting idea, about the way life suddenly seemed filled with possibilities again. My sister helped me move into a small but peaceful apartment overlooking a quiet park. It was not the house I lost, but it was mine, and that mattered. I had just started unpacking when someone knocked on my door. The moment I opened it, my stomach tightened. Mark. He stood there with an expression I remember too well, somewhere between regret and calculation. He said he heard about Switzerland, that he knew I had come into money, and that since we were still legally married, it was only fair that he receive a portion of it. I felt a calmness rise in me that surprised us both. "Mark," I said quietly, "you walked away when everything fell apart. You left me to carry the weight alone. You do not get to return now that things are better." He tried to argue, but the edge in my voice must have told him I meant every word. For the first time, I watched him realize that I was not the same woman he had abandoned. He finally stepped back, muttered something under his breath, and left. I closed the door behind him and leaned against it, letting out a long breath. It was the first moment I fully understood just how much strength had returned to me, not because of money or opportunity, or even gratitude from a man across the ocean, but because I had finally chosen myself. A week after Mark walked away from my door, I sat on the small balcony of my new apartment watching the late afternoon light settle over the park. For the first time in a long time, the air felt calm. Not because everything was perfect, but because I finally felt like I had a place to stand again. Caleb had already begun planning his return to school. He talked about architecture with the same spark he used to have before life grew heavy. Seeing that light come back into his eyes felt like its own kind of miracle. As for me, I began sketching out the foundation of my new consulting company. It would start small, a few clients, a simple office, nothing flashy, but it would be built on what I understood better than most: loss, resilience, starting again. One evening, I received a message from Graham. He was cleared to travel in a few months and hoped to visit Denver for follow-up care. He also wanted to see how my plans were unfolding and maybe share a cup of coffee somewhere quiet. I smiled at the screen longer than I meant to. Looking back now, I realized the moment my life changed was not when I stepped off the plane in Switzerland. It was when I walked into a plasma center believing I had nothing left to give. Sometimes the parts of ourselves we think are empty turn out to be the ones carrying the most worth. If this story resonated with you, feel free to like the video, share it, and leave a comment. Your support helps us bring more heartfelt stories to life.